Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to review Nobody's Looking, episodes 7 and 8, which is to cover the rest of this first season. Really, it's kind of up in the air whether there ever will be a second season. I think a lot of people probably make the consensus that this show is over, the show is done and finished. Really, you never know about a Netflix show, but you never know about any number of things. But, anyways, going into these last two episodes, really, I kind of found them to be kind of just okay. Like, really, I thought, like, the last two episodes were, like, if this is the way to end the show, like, it's kind of a very interesting way to just end the show. Really, I would say that this was kind of a fun journey. I do apologize for probably how long it took to eventually have these things eventually go on to the channel, really, to finish up this show. Because some people might have been really clinging on to these episodes or just kind of waiting forever for me to upload every single one of them. Like, well, that's the whole thing. Like, I've been doing these reviews on top of a number of other things. So, like, reasonably, like, I don't want to have to, like, upload 5 videos every day. So that way I can get all my bases covered. I know a lot of people probably do like this series, especially once I went from doing, like, a whole entire season in one shot, which a lot of people did like, to doing this way where I kind of trickled like 2 episodes every once in a while out, which this will be the end of this first season and will be done with this for who knows how long, until maybe we eventually see there is a eventually another season somewhere down the line. Probably not, but anyways, so going on into these episodes, I'm not going with the safety net of having names or whatever. So more than likely, I will probably just go off of memory of who anyone is. If there are, like, there probably were some supporting characters within these episodes that I won't have the names for, or I'll just kind of skirt around some things to try and just kind of get this review finished. So that we can kind of just call it a day. Because this review will be the last review that I actually do for the day. I kind of saved this one for last. So, going into these two episodes, really, it's we have to figure out and or have some kind of solution for a lot of these Angeles losing their feathers and their wings, and we also have to make the consensus of what Yuli is doing within these episodes. That is Yuli doing the right thing? Should he eventually end up going into becoming an angel that is to watch City of Angels for the rest of eternity? Bizarrely, we eventually have Marion at some point uh, in this episode eventually just sitting down with Yuli to actually just watch City of Angels, which I thought was kind of just funny. I'm like, yeah, like we actually have uh, Marion just going like, you know what? Like, is this movie to them actually all that bad? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, how is that really torture? Like, I guess seeing the same movie over and over and over again, like a million times, it's like, I guess that might be, like, horrible, but, like, I don't know. There's, like, worse movies that you could have had somebody watch, like, a million times over. So, maybe again, honestly, I'm probably thinking about bizarrely watching City of Angels because I have now watched this show not only once but now twice, and I've completed it twice. So really, I'm kind of almost going and playing with watching City of Angels. Anyone who reviews and or watches this review Let me know in the comments below if you want me to watch City of Angels, and I will do so. If there's a person or people that want me to do it, I will probably go ahead and do it. Probably more than likely, it'll probably be one of those things where I just so happen to just review it anyways, and because eventually I just need as much content as humanly possible on this channel anyways. So, like, I know full well that City of Angels isn't a trending thing onto YouTube, but more than likely I might just do it just because so that we can have more content on the channel. So, with that said, so really I think I've kind of covered what ends up happening for a bulk of this episode. We end up seeing Marion's parents in this episode. We end up also seeing that Miriam has a real, true, quite possible problem in this show that she has to speak with Yuli with to try and figure out what they are to do about this problem that she has. Well, I don't want to say problem, but like Miriam has this situation going on with her, and so we have it to where Marion has to go to Yuli to figure out what to do about it. We have it to where Fred is really considering in this episode to have Yuli become a guy that is going to be watching City of Angels for eternity, because we end up having it to where we have Fred who is thinking that the chief, aka God, is assessing or assuming that Yuli should be deemed the guy that watches City of Angels for eternity. And so, really, that isn't exactly 100% so. But, anyways, yeah. We have it to where also Greta and Chun are eventually going to have to try and figure out how to cure themselves of their feather losing ability, and eventually we will get to see what happens with that play out. They end up going to the veterinarian to try to figure out if really the veterinarian has some kind of solution, and eventually we'll get to the point of what ends up happening with that. So, with that said, I think I've gone over my 5 minute marker of kind of talking about this show as per usual in a 5 minute marker. So I think it's about that time to go into spoilers about this. Plus, I also kind of maybe repeated myself. Like I'm kind of getting to the point of just being a little bit tired today also, because I'll be like, ugh, like I think I've reviewed already 3 videos already, and this is going to be number 4. Normally, I would probably have reviewed like 5 videos in one day, but really, and plus also a lot of them would tend to be like way more complicated and whatever, and like, but like I'm really at like the tail end of my day to just be like, dude, I'm getting really really tired. So let's go into the coveted. Just let's go into spoilers. Spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this last 2 episodes. So in this first episode, we end up having Fred find out that Yuli is sleeping with Miriam. So we end up having Fred, who ends up handcuffing Yuli to decide that he is going to go and have Yuli watch City of Angels for an eternity. And so we end up having Greta to come to Yuli's evade and help him to try and not get arrested by Fred and take him to be seeing City of Angels for the rest of eternity. So we go on to have Yuli, who is to talk to Chun and Greta, and so we end up having both Greta and Chun kind of telling Yuli, like, you know what? Like, have you actually ever really and truly helped anybody? Like, with what you have done? Like, a lot of times we end up having Yuli who ends up trying to basically, like, conflict with a lot of things and try to raise a lot of questions. And we end up also having it to where Yuli seems to be growing his wings much larger, to where it seems that Greta and, of course, Chun are losing their wings. So, because we end up having Fred who is mentioning that because of Yuli's entrant, or because of Yuli's way of doing things, he has forcibly been making Chun and Greta like undone angels because of the anarchy that Yuli has brought to this Angelese society, I guess. So we end up having it to where Greta and Chun are almost questioning that. Maybe they're assuming or assessing that Yuli actually isn't like an angel. Maybe he's an anti-angel, and they don't even, and maybe they didn't even realize that at first. So we end up having Greta and Chun going with Yuli to try to find every single person that Yuli at some point had tried to help. So we end up having Yuli who ends up going in on this painter guy that he had tried to rescue from jail. And so we end up finding out forcibly that this painter is to forcibly paint things that he's not exactly enthused or jazzed about anymore. And that he is under some 5-year contract that he has to forcibly paint these paintings that he just isn't enthused about anymore. So technically, this guy is not happier. So technically, Yuli did not help him. So moving on. So we eventually have Yuli who is to go to the couple that were experimenting with SEX. And so we have it to where they are to ask if this couple is in a better place after Yuli had helped them. And coincidentally, that technically is a yes, but mainly a no, because really it helped them like do exploration a lot more, and it helped them kind of be more free, but it also had them go and do a video where eventually this video got to a person that this guy had worked with, and so this guy had lost his job over this video that someone had seen of him. And so technically they were technically worse off for all of that. So we move on and we go on to have Hewley go to, I believe his name is Richard, which is Miriam's ex-boyfriend, to try to see if he is living a better life now that he had broken up with Miriam. And so we end up finding out that it seems like this guy's happy, but really and truly he's just kind of going through the motions of his new relationship. Not kind of conflicting with anything that his new girlfriend is saying. He's just kind of going through the motions of things. To where really we have Chun who's basically mentioning that this guy isn't really and truly happy. He's just kind of going through the motions. So we've kind of scratched almost every single name off of Yuli's list of people that he's tried to help. We end up having Yuli who ends up going even to Marion to just kind of double check on her and like see where her life is at. We end up finding out that we end up having Yuli going to Miriam, and we have Miriam who is now seemingly living with her parents. And so we end up having Yuli who ends up appearing and is talking to her, Uh, and like Miriam, in the very early of this episode, she was still mad at Yuli, and Miriam was thinking that Yuli at some point was spying on her, and Miriam was kind of ticked about it. So, because Yuli could like not be seen by Miriam and still be watching over her, so we end up eventually having Yuli like greeting Miriam and like starting to talk to her, and at some point we end up having there being a fire in some garbage can that was lit by one of Miriam's parents. We end up immediately having it to where Yuli ends up going uh, and dousing out this fire by him just sitting on the trash can, and I guess that is to douse out the flame because oxygen is not into the trash can. So we end up having Yuli, who ends up getting up from this trash can to reveal that his pants have completely like burned through to where you're basically seeing this guy's rear end, this guy's butt, to where you end up seeing his like entire butt as he's walking away. So we end up having it seemingly that Yuli is trying to figure out what all he like has done, what all has gone wrong for him. And so we eventually have it to where while he is talking to Miriam, he is to eventually realize the key to figuring out Greta and Chun's wing problem. So because we end up having Yuli realizing that his wings are getting bigger. And so we go on, and it seems like Miriam is also sick. And so we end up having Yuli, who ends up trying to take care of her, and then he ends up going off to try and figure out about this whole wings situation, while also borrowing a pair of her pants. So we end up having Chun and Greta that are going to the veterinarian to see if the veterinarian can figure out how to help them. And so the veterinarian is to end up deciding, because this guy is high as F a bulk of the time. And so we end up having this guy deciding, well, hey, how about by helping you guys, how about we amputate your wings? And maybe that will be the problem solver of your guys' wings. Maybe we just need to amputate them. And so we end up having Greta who's like, well, sure, like it probably won't hurt me, so like either way I'm gonna lose my wings regardless. So because eventually we end up having Greta who showcases her wings to Fred and Yuli, and so we're seeing how like very small amount of feathers that Greta still has. So we at first have Greta who's going to go along with it, but since Chun is losing his feathers as well, we end up having Chun saying, well, how about this? How about I be the person that goes first, and then if it doesn't work, then like they can go and uh, do some kind of different thing with Greta. And so we end up having Chun, who ends up getting so ridiculously drugged so that way he can go to sleep. And we end up having Chun, who ends up dreaming that he is with the girl that he wanted to have sex with. And like he is reuniting with her in his dream, hugging her and whichever. So we have it to where Yuli is scrambling to go and find Greta and Chun, and he ends up finding them at the veterinarian place. So we end up having Yuli, who ends up telling, or ends up trying to figure out how to help his friends by going and taking the veterinarian and grabbing him and shoving him into this fish tank repetitiously, to where we end up having Yuli, who is telling both Greta and Chun that they need to desperately save this veterinarian. And so we end up having Greta, who ends up going and hitting uh, Yuli with some item in his back. And we end up having the veterinarian falling over. We end up having Chun, who is, yes, heavily drugged, but dragging his carcass to eventually give this veterinarian CPR. And so we end up having eventually Greta and Chun seemingly growing new feathers on their wings. And so we end up having Yuli coming up with the consensus is that to get new wings or bigger wings, all you need to do is save somebody and you'll be able to grow bigger wings. You just need to save someone's life. So we end up having Chun and Greta just going like, "Oh man, like I can't wait to get bigger wings." So we end up having Chun, who now that he has this problem solved, that he feels like his life isn't going to end. We end up having Chun decide that he wants to go and go on his own and not have to be tied to the chief, Fred, or anybody, and kind of go and do his own thing, which is kind of great. So we end up having it to where eventually Yuli is to decide to eventually just seek judgment with Fred, and Yuli is quite possibly thinking that that Greta and Chun uh, like should just take him on to Fred so they can just get this over with. We also have it to where Wanda is realizing that Fred is no longer at his desk. And we end up having Wanda, who ends up sitting in Fred's chair, and because evidently they didn't even realize that Fred was even gone. So we end up having Yuli, who is to go and seek out Fred, and so we end up finding out that Fred ended up getting unlocked by some other angel, and we end up having Yuli making it to uh, Miriam, because Miriam had made it back to where Fred is. So Miriam is to eventually go and have some important information to tell Yuli, because Miriam had been talking to her mother about her getting sick, and Miriam's mother had figured out why Miriam is sick. So we end up having Miriam, who ends up trying to desperately call out for Yuli, and Yuli does appear. So we end up having Miriam, who is trying to tell Yuli that she is pregnant and that she is having his child, and we end up having Yuli, who ends up getting taken out by Fred and this smaller angel and carted away. So we have it to where Miriam doesn't hear the final results of what Yuli will say about this. And we have it to where Miriam is like, "Oh, were you going to run off on me? You're going to vanish? You're not going to have an answer for me?" Like, good God. So we have it to where and Fred is going to go and have Yuli see City of Angels for the rest of eternity. But we end up having it to where Yuli is like, "Well, okay, before you have me do that, like, I want you to kiss me one last time. This is my last request." And we have it to where Fred is almost going and wanting to kiss Yuli. Because, like, well, I have to give him his last request. And so we end up having Fred, who ends up uncuffing Yuli, and we end up having them almost kissing. We end up having Fred, who ends up like puckering up and closes his eyes, and we end up having Yuli, who ends up scrambling behind Fred's back and running off to eventually go into the Chief's office, to where we have to forcibly have Fred go into the Chief's office. So we end up having Yuli breaking it to Fred that that there is just a hamster in the Chief's office. There is no one looking, and we end up having Yuli, who is trying to convince Fred of that whole entire time, that all of this is just random, and reasonably that Fred needs to be convinced of that. So Fred is to look at the hamster wheel and all kinds of things, and so we end up having it to where, like, Fred was this very innocent person, and we also have it to where Marion also goes and has Yuli watch City of Angels with her, where evidently she loves Meg Ryan, and we end up having it to where it seems that Yuli eventually does like City of Angels, and so it's not a problem if he has to forcibly watch it for eternity. Bizarrely, I guess Fred thinks that City of Angels is some kind of punishment, but it really actually isn't. So now Fred, Yuli, and Greta are all in this room, in the Chief's room. And so we end up having a hooded individual with giant wings appear out of seemingly nowhere to say, okay, who was the first person to ever go into this room, this office, this whatever? And we end up having Fred pointing to Yuli, and we end up having this hooded individual telling Yuli that it's like, well, I need to take you off to the side to have a conversation with you in private. And really, that's just how this show just ends, with like a question mark, with a like, hey, like, I guess that this show is ending, maybe. But I don't know. Like, some people might want this to eventually come back at some point. A lot of people could really just say that, like, oh no, this show is canceled. Netflix canceled it, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how many shows that you could probably say a show had ended or whatever, but then eventually they just bizarrely just did a second season after all. There's some times where you would have movies or shows that did a movie and then 10 years later did a sequel. But who knows? Probably, I think at some point when I originally reviewed this, I think someone had said, like, no, the show was definitely canceled and won't come back, whichever. But yeah, with that said, yeah, that's all I think that I have for this review. Yeah, really, like, this is actually just a really fun show because you end up having seemingly like an odd approach about angels, where it's not all about just like an angel is collecting a person after their death or whatever. No, it's a lot of times where you end up having like this almost kind of like kind of pressing on to think about how exactly religion really is, and if people are thinking about something the wrong way, you want to try to correct them or whatever. Especially if you actually have the real, true, right answers. But yeah, or what you would think is the real, true, and right answers, but you don't even know. But yeah, so going into this show, like, I like the way of which that it ended. Like, to me, I don't even remember actually watching like these last episodes. So like, it's good to go into a refresher and to remember these episodes. Because yeah, I think I did cover the whole entire first season the first time around, but maybe I probably did dance a little about dance around some things or whichever. But yeah, I feel good after finishing this whole entire show. So I am going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.